Precious came home early one day and was shocked to find her husband, Mr. Damien, in bed with her elder sister, Michelle. But the truth behind what she saw was even more shocking. Precious and Damien had a beautiful marriage. They loved each other deeply, and everywhere they went, Damien always wanted to take pictures with his wife. He was a very successful and well-known businessman with a reputation that reached across the world. Because of his status, he was always careful about his personal life and preferred to keep it private. Precious was a loving and caring wife. She worked as a general manager in a big company. They were blessed with 2 sons, Michael and James, who were in boarding school. Her elder sister, Michelle, was also married to a wealthy man, but unlike Damien, her husband was not kind. He shouted at her over every little thing and never allowed her to work. He preferred her to stay at home as a housewife. Michelle had been married for 10 years, but had no children. Her mother-in-law constantly insulted her, calling her a witch and accusing her of eating all her unborn babies. Life was very unfair to her, but she never told anyone. She always smiled in public and pretended that her husband treated her well. After some time, Precious stopped hearing from her sister. Worried, she decided to visit Michelle's house with her husband. When they arrived, they were shocked to find Michelle's husband beating her. They quickly intervened and rescued her. Later, they took her to a restaurant to talk. At the restaurant, Michelle broke down in tears and finally confessed the truth. She had been suffering in her marriage for 10 years. Her husband and his family treated her badly because she could not have children. Precious and Damien comforted her and assured her they would support her. A few days later, Precious couldn't stop thinking about Michelle's situation. She told her husband she wanted Michelle to move in with them for a while, at least until she recovered emotionally. Damien suggested they help her find a new place instead, but Precious insisted. She told him, "She is my only sister, and I want her close to me." The next day, Precious told Michelle to move in with them. At first, Michelle refused, saying she would be fine. But Precious insisted that it would be best for her, so she finally agreed. On her first night at their house, Michelle was served dinner. While eating, she watched how Damien treated Precious with so much love. He was kind, caring, and sweet to his wife. He made her laugh, and they looked so happy together. Michelle smiled but felt a deep pain inside. Later that night, while sitting alone in her room, she whispered to herself, "So this is what love looks like? Look at how he treats her. Why can't I have a man like that?" The next morning, Michelle woke up early and started cleaning the house. She swept the living room, washed the dishes, and tidied up the kitchen. When Precious saw her, she said, "Sister, stop. You don't have to do all the work. We have a housekeeper who comes every morning." But Michelle insisted, saying that keeping herself busy would help her heal. Precious smiled, happy to see that her sister was getting better. Later, Precious got ready for work and came downstairs. She saw Michelle watching TV and laughing. This made her even happier. "I'm leaving for work now," Precious said. Michelle smiled and replied, "Don't be late." About 30 minutes after Precious left, Damien came downstairs to get a glass of water before heading to work. As soon as Michelle saw him, she quickly stood up and walked toward him. She smiled and asked, "What would you like for breakfast?" But Damien shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it." At that moment, Michelle looked deep into his eyes. Something had changed inside her. And that was just the beginning. Damien was already dressed for work, but Michelle kept insisting on something. In the end, he agreed. On the weekend, Damien and his wife, Precious, were watching TV together and laughing. After a while, Damien told his wife he wanted to sleep, so he went upstairs. As soon as he left, Michelle moved closer to Precious and told her how lucky she was to have such a caring husband. Precious smiled and happily shared more about their life together. When Precious wasn't around, Michelle started thinking about everything. She felt jealous. "How can my sister have everything while I have nothing?" she thought. Precious had a loving, rich husband who spoiled her with gifts, and she had 2 beautiful children. Tears rolled down Michelle's face. One afternoon, when Precious was at work, Michelle went to sweep Damien and Precious's room. She knocked on the door and Damien told her to come in. She said she wanted to clean, but Damien told her it wasn't necessary. However, she insisted. While sweeping, Michelle suddenly fell and started crying, holding her knee. Damien quickly rushed to help her, but she grabbed him and said it was her thighs that hurt. As he tried to lift her up and take her to the living room, she held him down again and started touching him. Damien pushed her hands away and asked, "What are you doing?" Michelle confessed that she liked him and wanted him. Damien stood up immediately. "I'm your sister's husband. Do you realize that? Why would you like me?" he said angrily. He told her to stand up and leave. Meanwhile, at work, Precious's boss informed her that she needed to go on a one-week business trip. When she got home, she told Damien about it. The day Precious left, Michelle pretended to be sad and told her she would miss her. But the moment Precious was gone, Michelle was excited. She had the house to herself. She started wearing short clothes to get Damien's attention and danced in the living room whenever music played. But Damien ignored her. That night, Michelle went to Damien's room crying. She said she had a nightmare and couldn't sleep. Damien allowed her to stay, but warned her not to try anything funny. Michelle agreed. Later that night, while Damien was asleep, Michelle took off her clothes and placed his hand on her chest, then moved it lower. Damien woke up and tried to resist her, but in the end, he fell for her trap. The next morning, Damien was furious with himself. He felt guilty and angry. He ordered Michelle to leave the house, but she refused. "What will you tell your wife as the reason I left?" she asked. Damien knew he had messed up because he truly loved his wife. When Michelle tried to seduce him again, he refused. "Never again," he shouted. Michelle smirked. "So you want me to tell your wife? That big cucumber can't be for her alone. We are sisters. We share things, so it's not a big deal." Damien looked at her in disbelief. "Can you hear yourself? How can you do this to your sister?" he asked. Feeling overwhelmed, Damien left the room and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Michelle followed him and suddenly pushed him to the ground. She started touching him again. Damien told her to stop, but his body betrayed him. Just then, Precious arrived home. She had been calling Damien, but he wasn't answering. She heard noises from the kitchen and rushed to check. When she opened the door, she froze. Her husband and her sister were making love? Shocked, she screamed and ran to the living room, unable to believe what she had just seen. Betrayal and blood. Damien ran after her, desperation in his voice. "Precious, please. It's not what you think." She spun around, eyes burning with betrayal. "Oh, really? Then tell me, Damien, what do you think I think?" Her voice cracked, but her rage held firm. "I saw you," she continued, trembling. "I saw you making love to my sister. And now, you have the audacity to tell me it's not what I think? Fine. Go ahead. Explain yourself." Before Damien could respond, Michelle appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. She stood there, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips as she watched the chaos unfold. Precious turned to her, fury overtaking the heartbreak. She marched toward Michelle, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why, Michelle? We're sisters. We're supposed to protect each other." Michelle chuckled, her expression unreadable. "I'm glad you said that, sis. Looking out for each other. That's exactly what Damien was doing, looking out for me. The way a real man should." Precious's breath caught in her throat. Michelle leaned in, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think I'd just sit back and watch you enjoy him alone? No, Precious. He belongs to both of us now." Precious wiped away her tears and straightened her shoulders. "Get out of my house," she demanded, voice shaking but firm. Michelle only laughed. "Our house? The three of us?" Damien, who had been silent in his guilt, suddenly snapped out of his daze. He lunged toward Michelle, grabbing her arm. "Enough! You need to leave." But Michelle yanked away, unfazed. "Touch me again, and I swear, I'll expose everything." She pulled out her phone, the screen glowing ominously in the dim light. One tap, that's all it would take. I have the proof, she said, smirking. Videos, pictures. Imagine how the world would react when they find out Mr. Damien, the golden boy, the face of so many endorsements, was caught sleeping with his wife's own sister. Damien's face drained of color. Michelle tilted her head. Should I press send? A chilling silence filled the room. Precious turned to her husband. He didn't move, didn't speak, just placed his hands on his head, stepping backward as if retreating from his own downfall. Michelle grinned. She had them cornered. The question now was, what would Precious do next?